I always thought Sarah and I had a solid marriage. We had been together for over 15 years, and while things weren't perfect, I never imagined anything like this happening. One morning, everything changed. Sarah was getting ready to leave for work, and as I hugged her goodbye, something felt off. My hand brushed against her lower back, and I realized she wasn't wearing any underwear. Normally, that would have been a turn-on, but this time, it didn't sit right with me. I lifted the edge of her skirt, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why aren't you wearing anything under this?" I asked, not quite shouting, but close. She pulled away from me, almost as if she didn't care that I was standing right there, worried. "You'll understand everything tonight," she said, her tone cryptic, and then rushed out of the door before I could say anything else. I stood there for a minute, stunned, trying to process what just happened. My mind raced, but I had no answers. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone and shot off a quick message to my friend, Emma. "She's left. I think something's up. Can you help me?" I typed. Her reply came in almost immediately. "I've got someone keeping an eye on her. We'll know soon." It had all started 2 days earlier. I was working my night shift as usual when we got a call for a minor traffic accident. After making sure everyone was okay, I headed to the restroom for a break. That's when it hit me, a sharp, stabbing pain. I couldn't help but cry out, hunched over in agony. Brendan, one of the guys I worked with, heard me and came rushing in. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, his face twisted in concern when he saw me doubled over. "I don't know," I groaned, still in pain. Brendan glanced over at the urinal and cringed. "That's not good, man. You need to get this checked out." I looked where he was pointing, greenish discharge. My heart sank. I knew what it meant, and so did he. "Thanks, I'll go to a clinic first thing in the morning. Don't want to raise any red flags at our hospital," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The next morning, I made my way to a nearby hospital, hoping to avoid anyone I knew. The waiting room was thankfully empty, and they called me in quickly. After some tests, I sat in an exam room, anxious and scared. A nurse came in first, avoiding eye contact as she took my vitals. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she muttered before leaving. When the doctor finally walked in, he didn't sugarcoat anything. "Mr. Miller, I'm afraid I have some bad news," he said, looking at me seriously. "You have chlamydia." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "Chlamydia," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "You'll need antibiotics and to avoid any sexual activity for at least a week after treatment. Also, your recent sexual partners will need to be tested too." I stared at him, my mind spinning. "There's only been one," I said quietly. "My wife." After leaving the hospital, I was still in shock. Sarah had given me an STD. I couldn't wrap my head around it. We had been married for so long, and as far as I knew, neither of us had strayed. I had to tell someone, so I called my parents. My dad picked up, sounding cheerful, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing. "Hey, Dad. Can I come over?" "I've got a problem," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course, son. We'll put on some coffee." "Come on by," he replied, his voice full of the warmth and support I desperately needed at that moment. Growing up, my family had been religious, strict about values like fidelity and abstinence before marriage. I had followed those teachings and remained a virgin until I married Sarah when I was 23. She had been patient with me back then, teaching me what she liked and helping me through my inexperience. I had always thought our sex life was solid. It wasn't wild or adventurous, but it had worked for us. Or at least, I thought it had. When I got to my parents' house, my dad greeted me at the door with a hug. "Come on in, son," he said. "Your mom's got the coffee ready." I sat down with them at the dining room table. After a quick prayer over the meal, my dad gave me a concerned look. "What's going on, Alan? You don't look like yourself." Taking a deep breath, I decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. "I just got back from the doctor's. I have chlamydia." My mom gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "Oh, my word," she whispered. My dad, though, kept his calm demeanor, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "Were you unfaithful to Sarah?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. "No, Dad. I swear, I've never cheated on her," I answered, my voice shaking just a bit. He nodded, believing me without hesitation. "Then it's her," he said quietly. "What are you going to do now?" I sighed heavily, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. "I think I have to divorce her," I admitted, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. My mom looked heartbroken. "What about the girls? Lorna and Gloria? How will they handle this?" I knew my parents were thinking of my daughters. Lorna was 14, and Gloria was 13, old enough to understand what was happening, but still too young for this kind of betrayal to make sense. "They'll understand eventually," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed that myself. My dad nodded again, his face serious. "Well, if adultery is the issue, you have biblical grounds for divorce." Then, as if a light bulb had gone off in his head, he added, "Let me call Emma Hawkins. She's a family law attorney at our church. She'll know what to do." I agreed, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. My dad had always been the one to find solutions when things went wrong, and once again, he had come through. He called Emma right away, and within minutes, I had an appointment with her for later that afternoon. "Bring your financial records," my dad advised. "She'll need to look them over." When I got home to gather the paperwork, I made a discovery that left me reeling even more. About 8 years ago, Sarah had insisted that we file separate tax returns. I had gone along with it, not thinking much of it at the time. But as I sifted through the old forms, I noticed something strange. She had been earning far more than I'd known, substantial bonuses and commissions that she had never mentioned. Further digging revealed a hidden bank account with nearly $4 million in it. My heart sank as I realized how deep the deception went. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I clenched my jaw, typing back a quick, "Okay," though I could barely contain the rage boiling inside me. Sarah worked as a stockbroker on Wall Street, and late nights were common for her job, or so I thought. But now I saw it for what it was, an excuse to hide whatever she had been doing behind my back. I gathered the financial records, along with the details of the secret account, and headed to my meeting with Emma. When I got to her office, the receptionist led me inside, and Emma greeted me with a kind smile. "Alan, it's good to see you, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances," she said as she poured us both coffee. I recounted everything, finding out about the STD, the secret bank account, the late nights. Emma listened intently, taking notes the whole time. When I was done, she leaned forward and spoke frankly. "Alan, divorce isn't about justice. It's about money, how much you have and how much her lawyer can take from you. Even with proof of infidelity, you'll need more than just the STD. You need solid, undeniable evidence," she said, looking me straight in the eye. Emma's words hit me hard. Even with everything I had discovered, it wouldn't be enough. "What about the STD?" I asked. "Isn't that proof?" She shook her head. "Sarah's lawyer could argue that you got it from someone else, and unless you've got hard evidence of her cheating, it's all going to come down to what the judge believes." She paused for a moment before continuing. "And as for the hidden money, Sarah could easily claim it was a surprise fund for your retirement or some other innocent excuse. It looks suspicious to us, but proving intent? That's another story." I felt my stomach drop. "So I'm screwed?" I asked, slumping back in my chair. Emma leaned forward, her expression softening. "Not necessarily. I've got a private investigator I work with. He's one of the best. He can start surveillance on Sarah today if you want, and if she's still cheating, we'll have more than enough proof to present in court. It's not cheap, but it's the kind of evidence that's admissible and solid." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "Let's do it," I said, knowing that I needed to know the full truth, no matter the cost. "Great," Emma replied, reaching for a notepad. "I'll need information about Sarah's vehicle, make, model, license plate. And do you have any idea where she might be right now?" I pulled out my phone, remembering the tracker app one had installed on Sarah's phone when she lost it a few years ago. I opened the app and after a few seconds, there it was, her location. "Got her," I said, showing Emma the address on the screen. "She's at a house up north." Emma jotted down the details. "Perfect. I'll get the investigator on it right away." She called him, giving him all the necessary info while I sat there, my heart racing. After she hung up, she turned back to me. We should know soon if there's anything going on. I nodded, trying to stay calm. What about the kids? I asked, suddenly feeling protective of my daughters. Can I get custody? Emma sighed. It's going to be tough. Courts tend to favor the mother, especially if she hasn't been proven to be unfit. But if you've been the primary caregiver and you want to fight for it, we can definitely try. I've been the one taking care of them, I said, feeling a wave of frustration. Sarah's hardly ever home in the evenings. I've always made sure they have what they need. That's good, Emma said, nodding. It'll help your case. Are you sure the girls are biologically yours? The question caught me off guard, and I felt a sudden pang of doubt. I think so. I mean, I'm on their birth certificates, and I've raised them their whole lives. But does it really matter? It could, Emma said gently. Knowing for certain could strengthen your case. If you want to be absolutely sure, I know a lab that can do quick, discreet DNA testing. She handed me a business card for a testing center. I hesitated for a moment before taking the card. Okay, I'll think about it. What about your house? She asked, moving on to the next topic. It's in a family trust, and we've paid off the mortgage, I replied. Good, that'll make things simpler, she said. But we still need to divide up other assets. Everything's going to be split 50-50. I'll give you a checklist of everything we need to account for. I nodded, feeling overwhelmed. Is there anything else I should be doing right now? For now, we'll get the paperwork started, Emma said, sliding the checklist across the table toward me. But let's wait and see what the investigator finds before moving forward. And one last thing, you might want to confront Sarah about the STD legally. It's important that you inform her. I'll do that, I said, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. Good. And Alan, Emma added as I stood to leave, I know this is hard, but try not to do anything rash. It'll get better. Just take things one step at a time. I thanked her and headed out. Before going home, I stopped by the lab to pick up a DNA test kit. I didn't want to believe that my daughters might not be mine, but with everything else that had come to light, I couldn't take anything for granted. From there, I went to the bank to verify Sarah's secret account. The numbers didn't lie. She had stashed away nearly $4 million, all without me knowing. Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee, my mind racing. Most guys would probably be drowning their sorrows in booze, but I had never touched the stuff. I had grown up with strict values, and no matter how much everything else in my life was crumbling, I wasn't about to break that rule now. As I thought back to that morning, when Sarah had pulled away from me, saying I'd understand everything later, a chill ran down my spine. It was clear now that she had been planning something, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what that something was. Later that day, the front door burst open, and my daughters came bounding in. "Daddy, you're home!" Lorna exclaimed, wrapping her arms around me. Gloria stood by, looking more reserved. "Are you okay? Why aren't you at work?" I forced a smile, hugging them both. "I'm fine, girls. But I need you to pack some bags. You're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a few days." Lorna's face fell. "What's going on? Did you and Mom have a fight?" "Not exactly," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But something's wrong. We haven't fought about it yet." Lorna looked at me with wide eyes, as if she knew more than she was letting on. "You caught her cheating, didn't you?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What makes you say that?" She glanced down, her voice barely a whisper. "I've overheard some of her phone calls. She giggles like a schoolgirl. It was weird." I pulled her into a tight hug. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can always talk to me about anything." I let out a sigh. "But yeah, you're right." Gloria, still standing nearby, looked over at the DNA test kit on the table. "What's that for?" I hesitated for a moment. "It's just something my lawyer suggested we do, for legal reasons." After that conversation with the girls, I felt my heart breaking even more. I never wanted them to be caught up in this mess, but here we were. I explained that the DNA test was just to be sure of everything for the legal process. Lorna and Gloria reluctantly agreed, but I could tell they were both shaken. After swabbing their cheeks and mine, I sent them upstairs to pack their things. "Don't forget your homework," I called after them, trying to keep things as normal as possible, though nothing about this felt normal anymore. Once they were ready, we drove over to my parents' house. The girls stayed quiet in the back seat, clearly sensing the weight of the situation. When we got there, they gave me quick hugs and went inside without asking too many questions. I hugged them tightly, knowing that I might not be able to protect them from what was coming next. Later that evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, the silence of the house felt suffocating. My phone rang, breaking the heavy quiet. It was Emma. "Alan, we've got some information from the investigator," she said. "Your wife's been busy. 3 different men, all since around 1 p.m. today." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. "Jesus," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "What kind of evidence do we have?" "I'm sending everything to your email right now," Emma said. "Photos, videos, audio recordings. More than enough to prove infidelity." After I hung up, I pulled up my email and clicked on the files she sent. I skipped straight to the audio recording, needing to hear the truth for myself. The first thing I heard was a man's voice. "I see you're married," he said, and I could hear the clink of rings against a glass. Sarah's laugh followed, light and casual, like she didn't have a care in the world. "For now," she replied, her voice smug and playful. The man chuckled. "You're wearing a ring too." "My wife and I have an open marriage," the man said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "Well, mine's not open," Sarah replied, "but I take my liberties where I can get them." I clenched my fists as I listened. The man asked, "Your husband doesn't know?" "No, he doesn't," Sarah said, completely unconcerned. "He has no idea what kind of woman he married." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. 15 years of marriage, and this was what she thought of me? I pressed play again, needing to hear the rest, no matter how much it hurt. The man's voice came back, a little more curious now. "What's the deal?" "Trouble in paradise." Sarah laughed again, but this time it felt colder, more distant. "He's fine. I taught him everything he knows. Can you believe it? He was a virgin when we got married, 23 years old, and he'd never even kissed anyone else. Total Bible thumper. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't even curse. He'd probably faint if I said, 'damn' around him." The man laughed, and Sarah joined in. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper. "Sounds like a real square," the man said, still laughing. "Why do you stay with him? Do you even love the guy?" There was a pause, and I held my breath, waiting for her answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was dismissive. "I guess. Sort of. He's good with the kids, doesn't ask questions when I'm out late. But God, he's so boring." My chest tightened as I listened to her throw away our entire life together like it was nothing. The man pressed on. "The kids, are they his?" Sarah's response was flippant. "Who knows? Who cares? He thinks they are, and that's what matters." I stopped the recording there, my hands shaking. The room felt like it was spinning. All these years, I had trusted her, loved her, built a life with her, and this was how she saw me? I could barely wrap my head around it. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly jumped. It was Sarah. I didn't want to answer, but I needed to keep my cool, at least for a little while longer. I picked up the call. "Alan, are you okay? You sound a little off," she said, her voice sweet, like nothing was wrong. "Rough day," I replied, trying to sound normal, though I could barely keep the anger out of my voice. "I'll be home in about an hour," she said, her tone suddenly playful. "Still no underwear. You waiting?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Sure. I love you," she chirped, completely oblivious to what I now knew. "Me too," I said flatly before hanging up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, wondering if she would notice that I didn't say, "I love you" back. In the end, I didn't care. The truth was, I didn't love her anymore. How could I, after everything I had just heard? As the minutes ticked by, I gathered my thoughts. I printed out the most damning photos from Emma's email and placed them neatly in an envelope. Then I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Sarah to come home. An hour passed, then 2. Still no sign of her. Growing worried despite myself, I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. By the time nearly 4 hours had gone by, I was pacing around the house, unsure of what to do next. Just as I was about to give up, the home phone rang. I picked it up, dreading what I might hear. "Alan Miller speaking," I said, my voice weary. "Mr. Miller, this is Angela Barnes from Grace Hospital. Your wife has been in an accident. Can you come down immediately?" My heart raced as I tried to process her words. "Is she okay? What happened?" "I'm sorry, I can't disclose details over the phone. The doctor will speak with you when you arrive," she said, her voice professional and calm. Without another word, I grabbed the envelope of photos and rushed out the door, heading straight to the hospital. I wasn't sure what I would find when I got there, but I knew that the confrontation I had been preparing for would have to wait. When I arrived at the hospital, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. At the courtesy desk, I gave the receptionist Sarah's name. She typed something into the computer and then nodded toward a colleague. "Please escort Mr. Miller to the ICU," she said. As I followed the nurse to the intensive care unit, I felt like I was walking through a fog. My emotions were tangled. Part of me was still furious with Sarah, but another part of me was scared. No matter what she had done, she was still the mother of my kids. A police officer met me outside the ICU. "Mr. Miller, I'm Officer Simpson. I responded to your wife's accident." "What happened?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "She was crossing the road when a motorcycle sped between the cars and hit her," he explained. "The driver was high on drugs at the time." "I'm sorry." I was about to ask more questions, but before I could, the doctor came up to us. "Mr. Miller, I'm Dr. Blake. I've been overseeing your wife's case." "How is she?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "She's in critical condition," Dr. Blake said, his voice serious. "She has multiple fractures, internal injuries, and severe head trauma. We've placed her in a medically induced coma to help reduce the swelling in her brain. Right now, it's touch and go." My knees nearly gave out at that moment. I couldn't even picture Sarah like that, lying there, broken and fragile. She had always been so strong and determined, and now, this. Dr. Blake continued, "There's something else. Did you know about your wife's chlamydia diagnosis?" "I just found out this morning," I replied, my voice flat. "You need to be tested for HIV as well," Dr. Blake said, his words cutting through my daze. "We've run tests on Sarah, and while we're still waiting for results, there's a possibility she may be HIV positive." I blinked, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. "HIV?" "Yes," Dr. Blake said gently. "If you haven't been tested yet, I strongly urge you to see your doctor as soon as possible. If you are positive, treatment can help you manage it, but the sooner you know, the better." I nodded, too numb to fully grasp what that meant. "How long will she be here?" "It's hard to say," he replied. "She could be in the ICU for weeks, maybe even longer. We're monitoring her closely." He led me into Sarah's room, and when I saw her, my heart stopped. She was covered in bandages, one leg in a cast that went all the way up to her hip. Her face was swollen, bruised, and stitched in several places. She didn't look like the woman I had known for the last 15 years. She looked like someone who had survived a war. I stood there for a long time, staring at her, trying to reconcile my feelings. She had hurt me in ways I never thought possible, but seeing her like this, it still hurt. After a moment, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope of photos. I took off my wedding ring, the symbol of our life together, and placed it in the envelope alongside the pictures. Then, I wrote her name on the outside. "Nurse," I called softly. A young nurse stepped into the room. "Can you make sure she gets this when she wakes up?" The nurse nodded, her face kind but professional. "Of course, sir." I turned to leave but hesitated at the door, taking one last look at Sarah. As much as I wanted to hate her, seeing her like this still made my chest tighten. She had made her choices, but now it felt like fate had dealt her a cruel hand. I whispered, "Goodbye, Sarah," and walked out. Back at home, I collapsed into bed, drained both physically and emotionally. The past few days had been a nightmare, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. In the weeks that followed, I made arrangements for Sarah. I found a small, 2-bedroom apartment and paid the deposit and the first 2 months of rent from her share of our accounts. The apartment had a garage, and I moved all of her belongings there. It wasn't much, but it would give her a place to recover once she was released from the hospital. 3 weeks after that nightmarish shift at the hospital, I got the all-clear from my doctor. Thankfully, I had tested negative for HIV. It felt like a small victory, but the emotional wounds from Sarah's betrayal were still raw. Physical healing was one thing, but I knew it would take much longer for me to move past what she had done. Finally, 3 weeks after her accident, Sarah woke up from her coma. I dropped the girls off at my parents' house and drove to the hospital to see her. On the way there, I steeled myself for what was about to happen. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had to see it through. When I arrived, I spotted Dr. Blake talking with the nurses. A man in a brown jacket stood nearby, holding a manila envelope. He was the process server. "How is she?" I asked Dr. Blake as I approached. "She's stable," he said. "Her vitals are good, and the infection from the chlamydia has cleared up. We're just keeping her under observation now." I nodded, taking a deep breath. The process server followed me into Sarah's room, hanging back as I stepped up to her bedside. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes tired but alert. She glanced at the open envelope I had left on the table next to her bed, the one with the photos and my wedding ring inside. "Alan," she said weakly. "Sarah," I replied, my voice cold. She gestured toward the envelope. "So you found out?" "Yes," I said, my tone steady. "You passed your illness to me, and after that, I followed you. I have all the proof I need." The process server stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Are you Sarah Miller?" he asked formally. "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice barely audible. He handed her the manila envelope and took a quick photo with his phone. "You've been served," he said before quietly leaving the room. Sarah's face crumpled. "You couldn't even wait until I was out of the hospital?" she asked, her voice breaking. "No," I said firmly. "You were planning on leaving me anyway. I just moved up your timeline." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as she absorbed what was happening. "Do the girls know?" she asked, her voice small. "They know," I replied coldly. "They're not exactly thrilled with you right now. That's why they're not here. Don't worry about being responsible for them. I'm seeking full custody. They'll see you if they want to, but right now, they don't want anything to do with you." Her face crumpled even more. "I guess you hate me too," she muttered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, but I stayed firm. "You made your choices, Sarah," I said. "This isn't about hate. It's about facing the consequences of what you did." "How long will I be in the hospital?" she asked, changing the subject as if she couldn't handle the weight of the conversation. "The doctor says another week, maybe longer. After that, you'll go to the apartment I rented for you. All your stuff has been moved in. Utilities are in your name. You'll be fine." I pulled out an envelope from my jacket and handed it to her. "This is your half of our joint accounts, minus the deposit and the first 2 months of rent." She took it with trembling hands, staring down at the money that had once symbolized our shared life together. Then, her face hardened. "And my other account?" I looked her straight in the eye. "My lawyer has frozen your secret account. You'll get access to it again after you sign the divorce papers. You can take half. The other half is mine." Her eyes widened in shock. "You froze it?" she asked, disbelief coloring her tone. "I'll fight you for it." I leaned in slightly, my voice low and steady. "That would be a mistake, Sarah. If you try to fight me, all of the evidence, pictures, videos, recordings, will become public. Is that really what you want?" She paled at the thought, her defiance faltering. After a long pause, she nodded weakly. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll sign the papers." "Good," I said, turning to leave. Just as I reached the door, she called out after me. "Can I call the girls?" Her voice was fragile, like she already knew the answer but needed to ask anyway. I paused for a moment, keeping my hand on the door handle. "You can try," I said, my voice softer than before. "But don't be surprised if they don't answer." Sarah nodded, understanding what that meant. "Thank you, at least for that." Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving Sarah to face the reality she had created. As I passed by the nurses, I noticed a few of them giving me disapproving looks, but I shrugged it off. Their opinions didn't matter to me anymore. I had bigger things to deal with. The divorce was finalized quickly. Emma made sure that Sarah's secret account was split down the middle, and my half, $2 million, went straight into college funds for Lorna and Gloria. I wasn't interested in taking the money for myself. It was always about them. Not long after, I got the final results from my HIV test, negative. It was a huge relief, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. I had dodged a bullet, but I knew that the emotional scars from Sarah's betrayal would take much longer to heal. Life moved on. The girls eventually started speaking to Sarah again, though it took nearly a year for them to see her in person. I didn't interfere. I wanted them to make that decision on their own. They needed to come to terms with it in their own time. As for me, I focused on rebuilding. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the anger and hurt would bubble up to the surface. But with time, I started to heal. I realized that I was stronger than I thought, and I was determined to give my daughters the stable, loving home they deserved. In the end, Sarah was just a chapter in my life, a chapter that ended painfully, but one that taught me more about myself than I ever wanted to know. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I'll never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. And no matter what, I'll always be there for my girls. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.